Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ MV Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are the Breakfast Club. We have a special guest in the building.
She's back.
She's from Howard University.
Yes.
sir, Hampton.
Oh, my goodness. Senator Kamala Harris. Welcome back.
Good morning.
It's good to
Good
be
morning.
back. It's good to be back.
It's my first time meeting you,
I
finally.
cannot
Well, Angela
believe
meet
it.
Kamala meet Angela.
Nice to
Hey,
meet you.
how you doing?
Where you
This
want
is your
to?
third time here and my first time being
I
here
know,
at the same time.
I know, and that's why I keep coming back, waiting so I can be with you.
Where you want to start off? You want to start off talking about smoking weed and Tupac, or you want to get to that later?
Let's get to that later.
All right.
shall we?
I was like, I missed work for one day.
So let some of these guys start.
Dear Lord.
That was misconstrued, though.
It
They took
was.
that all out of
Of course
context.
it was, but it had a little shelf life of its
It
own.
did. For a long time.
It did. Now, the debates happened.
Yes.
I think a lot of people saw what I've been seeing for some time, and that's somebody who can take on Donald Trump. But there's still a lot of doubt, especially that a black woman can bring the fight to Donald Trump. So what do you say to the voter that's feeling like, wondering if you got what it takes to get at Trump?
Well, I do. And listen, there is so much about what we need to do to not only turn the page and let him see his time come to an end in the White House, but there's also what's at stake is about the future of our country. So on the first piece of it, it's going to be about having somebody on that stage in the general election who will know how to competently prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump. I know how to do that.
Yes.
And as far as I'm concerned, he's got a long rap sheet. There are plenty of evidence. And the way that I talk about it is this. Part of it is I have the experience going after the big banks who preyed on homeowners. The African-American community across this country was devastated by that foreclosure crisis. I took them on and won. I have the experience of going after big oil companies, taking them on and winning when they have been polluting communities and neighborhoods. I have the experience of going after for-profit colleges that were preying on our students. And I know what predators look like, and we have a predator living in the White House. Donald Trump has predatory instincts and a predatory nature. And here's the thing about predators. By their very nature, they prey on the vulnerable. They prey on those they perceive to be weak. They prey on those who need help and are often desperate for help. And I've successfully taken that on my entire career, and I can take this one on. And then it's about turning the page, and we can talk about that in terms of what the America we believe in and fighting toward that, right? And fighting for that. Fighting for what we can see, what we believe can be, unburdened by what has been.
So you feel he should be prosecuted?
I believe that the policies of this administration should be prosecuted. I believe that when you put babies in cages, when you separate children from their parents, when you pass a tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations in this country to the point that 60 corporations last year, the biggest, paid no taxes. Meanwhile, you got farmers in Iowa who got soybeans rotting in bins because of his so-called trade policy. He said he was going to come in and help working people. He's helped the top 1% and the biggest corporations. Meanwhile, some estimate that as many as 700,000 auto workers were going to lose their job before the end of the year. There is a long, long rap sheet.
I'd love to see crowds screaming, "Lock him up!" at your at your rallies. Remember they was doing that to Hillary, lock her
They
up?
did that. They're still doing it at his rallies.
They're
still doing that at his rallies.
Your people should do that at yours. Yeah. Lock him up.
Well,
Did you
we
see his
touched on
tweet?
a lot of things just now.
Hold on. Did you see his tweet when he said the thing about the kids in cages? It was like, well, if you don't want to be in cages, you shouldn't come here.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing.
Is that crazy?
But it's not only crazy. Like, let's really break this down. Because I believe there's so much about policy that, people can get into these intellectual conversations. But what is this really? What's really happening with real people behind this? And so how I try to remind people about this policy is this. So a mother, a father, living in what have been described as the murder capitals of the world, decides to pay a perfect stranger, a coyote, to transport their child out of the country of origin through the entire country of Mexico, facing unknown peril. Why would that parent do that? It is because that parent knows in her heart, in his heart, that for that child to stay where they are is going to be worse. So What does this government and this president do when they arrive at our border? Instead of what's supposed to be America's strong arms, embracing those who are fleeing harm, he says, go back to where you came from. That is immoral, and it violates who we say we are as a country based on our morals, our principles, and our values. And it needs to end, and we need a new president.
Can you break something down for me? When it comes to President Obama, they always talk about how he deported more illegal immigrants than any other sitting president, and they show pictures of the conditions of the border when he was in the White House. What's the difference?
Well, first of all, President Obama understood in a very brilliant and elegant way that when the President of the United States has a microphone in front of her, it should be used in a way that is about elevating public discourse. It should be in a way that is about treating people with respect and giving them dignity and lifting people up. This guy is all about thinking that power is about beating people down. He doesn't understand what we know. The real sign of strength of a human being is your ability to lift other people up. So the difference, let's just start there, is with tone and perspective on the issue of immigration. I do not question Barack Obama's perspective on this issue. He is, and I believe him to be a humanitarian who understands that we need to have border protection, but we also are a country that has said that we will give you refuge if you are fleeing harm. And so that's a major difference between President Obama and the current occupant of the White House.
What about ripping families apart? Because from my understanding, I thought President Barack Obama was not separating children from their families.
That's right. And there were also policies under the Obama administration that the Trump administration has ended that were about allowing the families to go through a process not in a cage, not in a private detention facility, where they would go through the asylum process, but they wouldn't be locked up like they're criminals. That's not how this administration has been conducting itself. You mentioned, Charlamagne, after the debate in Miami. So the next morning, I went down to a place in Florida called Homestead. And in Homestead, Florida, there is a private detention facility that is currently housing 2,700 children.
Yikes.
So we get there. Now, I am a member of the United States Senate. I am on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I am on the Senate Homeland Security Committee, in addition to others. They would not let us, Julian Castro was with me, there were a couple of us, would not let us go inside to see what was going on inside the detention facility. They're being paid by American tax dollars, but it's a private detention facility. So there are a couple of points here. One, a private detention facility. Let's talk about the business model. It's about some people making a lot of money off the incarceration of other people called children, profiting off the incarceration of children. So they wouldn't let us in. So I walked down the road and got on a ladder and then climbed up that ladder to look over the fence. And what I saw were these children lined up in single file by gender, being walked into barracks. These children have done nothing wrong. And you know what is also being lost in this conversation, because it's been going on now for 2+ years, is the trauma. You and I have talked about this many times. The trauma that is being inflicted on these children. And the other thing you should know about what's going on in Homestead and other places, many of them, their parents are outside on the other side of that fence wanting their babies.
Right.
So our private detention.
And so back to your point about what was going on with the Obama administration, at least while they were going through the process, they were allowed to be together as a family unit and actually had higher returns on the number of people who would show up for the proceedings when you treated people with humanity.
Right. Because at the end of the day, these are still human beings. These are children. These are people. And I see they're going to be doing these immigration raids that's supposed to be starting on Sunday.
I know.
So what can be done about this as a member of the Senate? What can be done?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, one is that, and all of your listeners, support those community-based organizations that are giving assistance to the families. support those nonprofit legal organizations that are providing legal assistance to the families to help them go through a process that is complex and very difficult to understand because they're not entitled to have lawyers. And it's churches, it's community organizations, it's nonprofits that are doing all this work. So support that. Mm-hmm. It is also about saying to your members of Congress and to the members of your senators, stand up, speak up. This is a violation of our morals and our principles and our values, at least those that we say we have. But ultimately, we need a new president. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be about this election in 2020 because elections matter. Look, don't hate the player, hate the game. Elections matter. Mm-hmm. When you win an election, you get to set the rules.
How can you win with Russian interference, though?
That's a real
what I'm
thing.
Scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right. So, again, as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I will tell you that we should believe exactly what the intelligence community has told us, which is Russia did interfere in the election of the President of the United States in 2016. Listen to what Christopher Wray has told us, who is the current head of the FBI, that 2020, we all should have good reason to know, might be worse than 2016. And here's the thing about it, though. What that was, and this is where it's vicious when you break it down. So Russia, long-standing adversary, foe of the United States, wants to regain whatever power it once had, right? And so they're trying to figure out how can they make us weaker. So one of the greatest strengths of who we are, it's you can't feel it. It's not like a tank, but it is something that's real, is that people respect that we have a democracy, mm-hmm. right? So it gives us strength when we're on the world stage. And one of the greatest pillars of a democracy are free and open elections. So what does Russia do? Well, let's mess with that. Mm. So what do? They then say, how can we get the American public to not have confidence and to start going at each other? How can we break whatever unity exists in that country? So they test out a couple of things to see what can get the American public going at each other, pointing fingers at each other. They test out a bunch of stuff. Guess what gains the most heat?
Racism?
Race. Mm-hmm. So that's what they start to do.
Right.
That's what they start to do. They did it then, they will do it now. People have said, if you look at, for example, the heat that ended up around the bend the knee and Colin Kaepernick. Mm-hmm. Many smart people have said it actually was not a thing. Mm-hmm. The Russian bots started taking that on.
Really?
Yes.
You feel like you're being targeted by Russian bots now?
Well, we already know we are. Yeah. And so part of the question then back to, how do we get to the solution, right? Knowing that there's a problem.
The fight is fixed, it seems like.
Well, what we have to do is we also have to know when we're being played. Mm. And we also have to respond immediately when we know something is inaccurate. Because in 2016, I think it's fair to say a lot of folks thought, oh, nobody's going to take that seriously. That won't gain any heat. Remember that whole thing, for example, the Pizzagate thing on Hillary? Mm-hmm. Remember about the whether she was involved in some ring in a pizza parlor? And everybody knew that just sounds ridiculous.
Yeah. Kinda stupid,
That's
right?
not that right. That's not going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have to pay attention to that stuff and know that it's not going to necessarily be real people doing it. It'll be others and those bots that stir it up to the point that it generates heat, and then people start getting swept into it, right?
One thing I would say about Donald Trump and all the negativity that he's putting out there is making a lot of the younger people get into politics a lot earlier.
Yeah.
My daughter, who's 6 years old, we were talking yesterday, and she's telling me that she thinks Donald Trump is a dummy, right? And I said, well, why would you use the word dummy? And I don't even know where she heard it from. She was like, yeah, he doesn't believe in climate control, and he doesn't understand that the plastic straws kill the turtles. I was like, what are you talking about? Because I had no idea. And she was like, no, the plastic straws kill the turtles. People put the plastic in the ocean, and it kills the turtles, and the turtles are around for 200 years, and they die. And if he doesn't believe in climate control, what's wrong with him? So I was like, okay. So my question to you is, with climate control and him not believing in it, how do we reverse that? How do we try to fix what's going on with this earth because she's scared. She's 6, and she was like, she wants to be around to see her kids
And she's right.
grandkids, and I'm sure.
And she's right, and let us listen to the children. She's right. So the way that I've begun to talk about it is the climate crisis, because it's real, right? So I'm supporting a Green New Deal. It is my full intention after getting elected as one of my first acts to get us back in the Paris Agreement, which is an agreement with all the friends about what we collectively must do to take serious this climate crisis. But first of all, she's right about Donald Trump. He's pushing science fiction instead of science fact. This is a guy who said wind turbines cause cancer. I think it was Jay Inslee, somebody on the debate stage, he rightly said, they don't cause cancer, they cause jobs, right? You invest in renewable energy, things like wind turbines and solar paneling. That's going to be about jobs. That's going to be about pipe fitters and electricians, right? And the work that needs to be done to shift away from, as much as possible, fossil fuels, right? So we can save the air that we need to breathe. It's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing our reliance on oil. Well, the big oil companies, and I've taken them on. I took them on as Attorney General of California. They are powerful. They are powerful, and it is no joke the kind of leverage they have in places like Washington, D.C. And so we have to fight, and the children will lead the way. I'm going to tell you that, because it is their future, and it really is well accepted that actually over even just the next 12 years, if we don't do something, we're going to have irreparable, meaning beyond repair damage. And this issue is probably one of the most urgent reasons why we need a new president of the United States.
But what about people who, they say almost half of all Americans approve of Trump's handling of the economy? People care about their money. Everything else we're talking about
let's
now
talk about that.
And we
great,
just saw Bob Johnson,
but people care about their
the
money.
founder of BET, make a statement about that as well.
So how do you run against what looks like a strong economy?
So,
And is it a strong economy?
okay, back to the last thing before we just leave that subject. I also want to add water, Flint, communities around the country, including in the South, that are having deteriorating pipes and all that, and what that also is about the environment. Economy.
The money.
Yeah. So this president will walk around, right, clucking about how this economy is doing great. Economy is great, he says.
Unemployment rate at all-time low.
Yeah, but
For
here's
black
the,
people.
here's the thing, guys.
says,
Here's the thing. When you ask, how are you measuring the greatness of this economy of yours? You know what they point to? They point to the stock market.
Stock market up.
Well,
yeah.
that's fine if you own stocks.
Right.
That's true.
Then you ask, well, how else are you measuring the greatness, the so-called greatness of this economy of yours? And they talk, to your point, Charlamagne, about the unemployment numbers. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I'm traveling our country. Yes, people are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. And in our America, people should only have to work 1 job to have a roof over their head and be able to put food on the table.
You know why that's big when you say that? Because you're Jamaican. So for a Jamaican to be telling people not to only have 1 job, I've heard that's pretty big.
Shut up, man.
He's just living in living color. Bless his heart. He's just living back in the day.
Oh, my goodness.
But we do think about how stressful that is on a person who has a family and has to work 2 or 3 jobs and can't spend the time they need to spend at home. And it's stressful, period.
That's right. And to your point, it's stressful. Working 2 and 3 jobs means that when your child is coming home from school and needs help with their homework, you're not able to be there. It means that you're not able to spend some of the most precious time that you can with a child, especially our younger children, which is before they go to bed, reading to them. It has all kinds of generational impact. When parents and families have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to put food on the table and pay the bills. And I'm going to tell you something. Let's keep going with this point. In America today, for almost half of American families, they cannot afford a $400 unexpected expense. In America today, in 99% of the counties, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a 1-bedroom apartment. So part of what I'm proposing is that we change the tax code. So for families that make less than $100,000 a year, they get a $6,000 tax credit that they can receive at up to $500 a month, which is all the difference between those families being able to get through the end of the month or not. And see, the difference between my approach and this current president's approach is he's all about helping the richest people.
Right.
instead of what we need to do, which is to focus on working families, to focus on people who every night are waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering how they're going to be able to get through the month and pay their bills. I call mine the 3 a.m. agenda, right? People can talk about how they want to transform the world. Well, let's first just start dealing with the things that wake people up in the middle of the night, which is going to be about their health care. It's going to be about their children. It's going to be about how they get through the end of the month, how they pay off the student loans. We could go on down the list.
Since we're talking about finances, I want you to explain something to me. So I saw you were talking about credit reports.
Yes,
and what gets reported
good.
on credit reports.
Yes.
And then you're proposing,
Yes, okay.
Along with other people, that
AOC,
rent,
right?
yeah, is it?
She's with me on, I'm sure,
Fair housing?
I would assume
That's the
that
fair
she'll
chance of
support this,
housing.
but on fair housing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, but this is about being able to report your rent, your phone
That's
bill,
right.
and things
Let's
like
talk
that on
about
your
that.
credit report.
Yeah.
Now, some people might feel like that's not beneficial. And I can see to the point that it is, because some people don't have credit and they need more on their credit report. But what about people who may, have some issues, miss some rent payments, and not want that on there?
That's a good point. Okay, so here, the policy that you're referring to is I have a plan that is about really reducing the racial wealth gap in America, which is profound, and especially the wealth gap between white families and black families and Latino families. And so part of what it is this. If you look at the history of our country, one of the greatest sources of wealth and assets for a middle-class family is home ownership.
Correct.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just do a quick history lesson.
Mm-hmm.
World War II, the GI Bill, all those bills that were about all these returning veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So there was government assistance to these returning veterans to help them buy homes. Well, black veterans, not so much. So when we had a surge of assistance to help people with home ownership, it excluded an entire population of people. You fast forward to years then and later, including today, redlining, where there were rules in place and practices in place that excluded black folks from buying homes in certain communities, and those communities which often would actually see rising value for home ownership, right? You go fast forward to 2017 during the foreclosure crisis. Black families, Latino families, immigrant families were the most devastated, and black families in particular have recovered the slowest from that. So what we're talking about now is generational exclusion from a main source of wealth, which is home ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's think about this in context. What does that mean? Well, that means that when your child graduates high school or college and says, I want to start a business, well, there are some families that can say, well, I'll go into the assets that we have in our home to give you a loan to start your business.
Pull the equity out.
Pull the equity out.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go to Hampton or better yet Howard, and I'll say, well, you know what? I don't want you to have to rack up those student loans.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pull some equity out the home to help you pay for tuition.
Mm-hmm.
Intergenerational wealth creates intergenerational wealth.
Mm-hmm.
The lack of access to that wealth creates intergenerational debt.
All right.
So what I'm proposing is what will be a $100 billion federal investment in addressing that. Specifically, this is how it's going to work. For families that are living in federally subsidized housing, or families that are living in traditionally red line districts, they will have access to these loans that will be about helping them with down payments to actually buy a home. To your point about the credit piece, what it will also do is this. So much of how people can qualify for a loan is based on their credit history, their credit rating, right? So credit ratings tend to rate the credit of people who already have assets. So they rate things like how many credit cards you have.
Right.
Are you paying those credit cards off on time? Well, that assumes you have credit cards, which means it assumes you already have you have assets.
Right.
Right? So anybody who currently doesn't have those kinds of assets is excluded.
They said it's
From
even
getting-
worse sometimes than having bad credit.
Right. Because you're excluded from getting that thing that says, oh, this is a good bet to give you a loan for a home, right? So what I'm saying is there are plenty of families who they are financially responsible, but they don't have a lot of assets. And so if the whole point of credit rating is to figure out who's financially responsible, then let's do that. So what I want to do is extend it to say, you paying your phone bill on time every month? That's financial responsibility. I want to count that. You paying the rent every month on time? That's financial responsibility.
Word.
You paying your utilities on time every month? That's financial responsibility. I want to count that.
Towards your credit.
Yeah.
Yes.
And your credit standing, your credit status to determine if you should qualify for a loan. Because the whole point of it is supposed to be to measure, are you financially responsible?
But does it benefit only people that can't afford it, low income? Like, they made a big deal on opportunity zones, right?
Yeah.
They said opportunity zones a great thing, and you could get tax abatements, and that's wonderful, right? But what's going to stop somebody who's a millionaire or a billionaire that buys real estate to go into that opportunity zone? Because now they're getting the same breaks as the people that it was supposed to be meant for.
Right.
Like, there's no difference. Like,
Right.
somebody who's a real estate guru can go in there and says, okay, I'm buying this property. I'm going to raise the rent in 10 years. I only got to stay there 10 years. I can park the money for 10 years if I'm a real estate guru.
Yeah.
But if I'm an average person that's struggling, like you said,
Yeah.
check to check, I can't
Yeah.
park my money there for 10 years.
So
does it only benefit people who need it?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. To qualify, you have to be living in federally subsidized housing, which those billionaires and millionaires will not be doing.
Yeah.
Hell no.
They're not doing that.
Right? And
Not the white ones anyway.
well,
The black millionaires will definitely go into that. It's the truth. Because if you care about your community.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. There are a couple.
Yeah.
And then folks, families that are living in historically redline communities, and they have to be living in that community for at least 10 years. So that's how we address that concern, which is a legitimate and right concern.
You partnered with AOC on that, right?
Yes.
Why
Well,
AOC?
no. So the one we're partnering with
Okay.
that we announced yesterday is similar. Has to do with formerly incarcerated folks. There's a one-strike policy in public housing. So if you have a conviction, you can't live in public housing.
And
you
your
can be
whole
evicted,
family gets kicked
and
out.
your whole family.
That's
And
crazy.
so you go back. You've served your time. You've done your time. You go back to live with your grandmother. You go back to live with your father. And you and your whole family will get evicted from public housing. So the bill that AOC and I are working on, and we just announced, is to basically eliminate that as a basis for evicting that person or that family.
Why is AOC so polarizing to older Democrats, you think?
I think she is bold and smart as anything. She's so smart and bold. And she, the thing that I really like about her, among many things, is she requires people to question the premise. Like, she doesn't she's not going to go with status quo because that's the way it's always been done. She questions it. And I think that's healthy. And then if you can defend what we've always been doing, then that's great. And if you can't, because it's based on stuff that is faulty or it's old and it's just not happening anymore, then answer for that. So, I think that when you have anyone who is as smart and as bold as her, questioning the system and doing it in such an effective way, it can throw people off their game.
What do you think about
sexism plays a part in that?
And we're talking
too?
about Alexandria Cortez.
Yeah,
The people
Yes.
that don't know- the people
Yeah.
that don't know her
What do you
name.
think about her calling Nancy Pelosi disrespectful for singling out women of color, for being a part of the Twitter world and saying they don't have a real following?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's not my experience with Nancy Pelosi. And I've known her and worked with her for years. I've known her to be very respectful of women of color and very supportive of them. So I have a different experience.
So do you think sexism plays a part in that as well? And even with yourself, I'm sure you see a lot of sexism. And even just looking at how women's rights are being attacked right now when it comes to our bodies.
Yes,
And even looking at Donald Trump and seeing how women can accuse him, over 20 women accuse him of sexual assault or sexual misconduct, and he can come up with an excuse like, oh, she's not my type.
Yeah.
And people accept that.
Isn't that something? No, you're right. Look, I mean, to your point, women's access to reproductive health is full on under attack in America today. I was just in Alabama recently, what that legislature did in saying a doctor who performs an abortion or assists an abortion can face up to 99 years in prison. In Georgia, in Missouri. And let's be really clear to your point, and this is not being extreme. Women will die. and in particular poor women and women of color.
Right.
Because we will not have access to be able to travel to another state where there's legal and physician-assisted help.
And then there'll be illegal backdoor
There-
abortions,
right,
just
out
like
of
there
out
used
of
to be.
right. So it is a real issue, and to your point, it speaks to a larger issue, which is in our society, historically and today, women are not given full credit for having the ability to make decisions not only about their body but about their families, their community. I mean, here's one of the other things that I'm prepared to do, which is deal with the issue of equal pay.
Mm-hmm.
We passed the Equal Pay Act in 1963. Fast forward to the year of our Lord 2019. Women are paid 80 cents on the dollar, Black women 61 cents, Native American women 58 cents, Latinas 53 cents. We're still having this conversation.
Right.
So here's what I'm prepared to do. Instead of putting the burden on that working woman to prove that she's not getting paid as much, I'm going to shift the burden to the corporations to require that they prove they're paying people equally.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to post that information on their website. And there's more. And to the point that they are paying women differently than men. For every 1% that they're paying women different than men, an equal 1% of their previous year's profits will be fined. And they will have to pay. And that will get their attention.
Now, Kamala, let me ask you a question. With
Wow.
everything that we talk and we seen on stage, it seems like,
Senator Harris.
Senator Harris.
Oh, no, I'm Kamala.
Feels like
My mother named me Kamala.
she's a friend of
Although
mine.
there
She'll
there
HBCU.
may be many people in the United States Senate whose mothers named them Senator.
But I feel like, with everybody on stage, it's almost like, free, we're going to raise minimum wage, free health care, free student loans.
Everybody
Black
saying
people
what you
gonna
wanna
get
hear.
reparations.
Yeah.
It's like, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car.
Yeah.
It sounds good, but what's real and what's bullshit? Like,
Yeah.
what, as president, can we really do?
That's
right
right.
now it sounds good. Everybody
That's
wants
right.
to massage you.
Right,
but
'cause it's
what
great.
can we really, really do?
Lofty
Right.
ideals, but can these things happen?
Yeah,
They can't.
When you
They-
become president, what can you really do?
Well, I'm going to tell you, that's why I'm not churning out plans like a factory, because it is really important to me that any plan that I'm prepared to implement is actually doable.
So you see the bullshit too. Bull crap.
Well, I just think that, okay, here's the generous way to say that.
Yes, ma'am.
People are aspirational, and so you have a goal, and then if you can, and that should be the goal, and then let's try and get there, right? But for example, my plan about changing the tax code so that families under $100,000 get up to $6,000 that they can collect at $500 a month. You know how we're going to pay for that? On day one, we're going to repeal that tax bill that Trump passed that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations. I've got a whole proposal that's about teacher pay, because our teachers are paid nowhere near their value. Teachers across America are working 2 and 3 jobs. Teachers, 94% of them in our public schools are coming out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies. Teachers are paid on average 11% less than similarly educated people. I've got a whole plan that's about basically a federal investment in closing the teacher pay gap. How are we going to pay for that? We're going to increase the estate taxes, because actually people at the top 1% can afford to pay more and should. So every plan that I have, I will speak for myself, comes with a how-to and that it can be done.
Will it get passed through Senate or Republican Senate? Because to Envy's point, that's one of the reasons I get mad when they say, "Oh, you can't impeach Trump; it'll never get through Senate." 90% of the stuff Democrats say probably won't get through a Republican Senate.
No, to your point. First of all, there are a couple. There are actually a few initiatives that I have that I'm going to do by executive action. Because to your point, I'm done, and it is within the executive branch and the power of the president to do certain things within her power that do not require congressional consent or approval.
That's one thing Donald Trump has definitely taught us.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, pay attention.
Yeah.
Exactly. But to your point, look, everybody's focused on the White House, rightly, and I hope to have your support. And please go to KamalaHarris.org. The other piece of it is that we've got to take back the Senate. And so for everybody listening, pay attention to those Senate races, because that's real.
Right.
That's
SBC.
real. Yeah. And again, it gets back to the point that elections matter.
Mm-hmm.
When you win, so when Democrats are in the majority in the United States Senate, it will be a lot easier to get some of these investments in working families through. And that's what we're talking about, as far as I'm concerned. These are about investments in American families. And it's about saying, look, I'm prepared every day to put money into an American family, put money into to the workers of America, and we will get a return on that investment. So don't talk to me just about cost. Talk to me about the return on the investment.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Joe Biden. Talk about the debate. You got in Joe Biden's ass at the debate.
Got in his ass.
Yeah, you pressed him on his record about busing. But a lot of people have noted that, your position on busing is the same as Biden's. Is it the same?
No, it is not.
Okay. That's a misconception. Let's clear that up.
It is, and I appreciate
got that from Fox News, too, by the way. Carl Rove, I'm sorry. But
Well, everybody's entitled to their opinion, including him. But let's clear that up. Thank you. We cannot rewrite history on this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the reason I raised it on that stage. America's history on this issue is that there had to be busing because there were people like those segregationists who served in the United States Senate, who served in the Congress, who served in state houses, who were using every breath they had to fight against integration of the public schools of America. And before that, were using every power they had to segregate those schools. So busing had to happen. And the fact is that we just have a disagreement, the vice president and I, on that point, which is I absolutely am in favor of what had to happen at that time. And he and I have a disagreement about that in terms of his believing that that was necessary or not. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward to today, look, America's schools are as segregated now as they were then, for a variety of reasons that are different. Now we don't have people in state houses and legislatures in the United States Congress who are pushing for segregation by law and pushing against integration. But what we do have is a situation where, here's where I'm going to go through a little bit of history, but I think it's really important to mention. So Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, the United States Supreme Court said separate but equal is not constitutional. You cannot say that when you have black children and white children being educated separately that they're getting an equal education, because we know that's not the case. So Brown v. Board of Education said desegregate America's schools. Part of what, and I wouldn't be standing here if Brown v. Board of Education wasn't decided. That being said, part of the, I think, unintended consequence perhaps, but part of the effect was white families started, and those families with resources started pulling their children out of these public schools so that their children would not have to go to school or would not have to be bused. Because remember, busing was not only that we were sent to the rich neighborhoods,
both
but
ways.
Right.
And they definitely didn't want that.
So families started pulling, and that's just an undeniable fact. And what happened over a period of time, for a variety of reasons, including that, was that we started pulling resources out of public education. And so, again, in almost the majority of states, you will find, with many exceptions, but you will find generally that it is poor children and children of color who are in a situation where their schools, their teachers, their administrations are not being given the resources that are necessary to adequately educate our children.
So you're not for busing, or you are for busing?
For that period of
At that
time,
period of time,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
He was tight about that one.
I'm saying that right now, mandatory busing, look, busing in terms of whether a school district decides to do it, it's up to them, and that's in their tool belt. But what we have now is a situation that is very different than then, where we needed court intervention. Because, again, getting into the details, right now courts would not intervene to require mandatory busing because there are a series of cases that said they can't. So that's where we are.
What's your relationship with Joe Biden? Because he seemed like a little startled and a little upset about that.
He said he was surprised you attacked him.
You even met Bo before, and I was like, what does that have to do with the other? Like, it felt like he was looking for sympathy. So what's your relationship?
I was the first. Well, let's go back to Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. I supported him when he ran for United States Senate. He came out and supported me when I ran for re-election as district attorney of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. I'm told that I was the first elected person in California to endorse him when he decided to run for president. In fact, along with my family, we went out to Springfield when he and Michelle announced his candidacy. And so I was very involved from the very beginning of that campaign. I will remind you, and it is important to know that early in those days, Joe Biden was running against Barack Obama. But I...
That's when he was making comments like Barack Obama was the first black male he ever met that was bright, articulate, and clean.
But then, but I want to say this. Then there was a joining of forces, and now, former President Obama chose Joe Biden as a vice president. So I got to know him loosely in the connection with that campaign. Bo, his son, I write about in my book, was an incredible person, an incredible human being, and a very dear friend to me. When I was battling the big banks, Bo stood with me. He was the Attorney General of Delaware at the time. And Bo and his father have a very special relationship. And so through Bo, I got to know his father, mostly just because of the love that they shared for each other. That's separate from the fact that segregationists in the United States Senate
Business is not
stood
personal.
and lived their careers to segregate the races in public education in the United States. And that I was one of those many children who was personally impacted by that. And I'm not going to let us engage on a debate stage for who's going to be the next president of the United States. I'm not going to allow us to engage in revisionist history. And I will tell you also, after I said that, I cannot tell you the number of men and women who have said to me, I was that girl. I was that boy. And I can't stand on that stage and allow certain conversations to be taking place. Because remember, I didn't bring this conversation up about these segregationists. That had been going on for weeks. But I cannot be on that stage and not speak up to make sure that we are having a full accounting for American history on these issues.
He apologized for it, though, for his remarks on him. Did he hit you up behind the scenes like, why'd you do that to me?
No.
Nothing at all?
No.
I wonder who President Barack Obama will endorse. You think that's going to make a big impact, whoever he decides to endorse?
Of course it will make a big impact if he decides to. Yeah.
I know you got to go.
I think so.
I want to ask you one last question. How does it make you feel as a black woman when you see white men like Joe Biden leading the polls amongst black voters? Just personally, how does that make you feel?
Well, I don't take it personal, and I'll tell you why. It's relatively early in the campaign, and I'm still in the process of introducing myself to folks. He, on the other hand, has run for president 3 times. He served for 2 terms as vice president of the United States under a very popular president. So more people are going to know him. But I will tell you, I am seeing that the more that we are out there and can introduce ourselves, and I am working from dawn to dusk every day. I am out there and I'm spending a lot of time in South Carolina and Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada.
And you're seeing results.
And we're seeing results. And we're seeing results. So I think that the job for me is to make sure that people know that we're here and that, this is our message, this is our plan. And what I'm seeing is that when they hear it and know it, they are supportive.
Is there a political risk in having a specific black agenda? Because we never saw Barack Obama do that, but now all the Democrats seem to have one. From Mayor Pete to yourself, Elizabeth Warren, is there a political risk in that?
There shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. The way that I think about it is that, it is about America's agenda. It's about America's agenda. When we talk about the history of redlining, that's about America's history. That's not about black history.
Even conversation about reparations, that's America's
That's
history.
about American history. It's not black history. So when we talk about the agenda, it's about America's agenda. And look, and the agenda is broad. I mean, there's a lot on the table.
A lot.
Yeah.
We didn't even get to address half of it today.
No, we didn't. And there's so much more. Can I come back?
Of course.
Okay.
You come back.
I'll make sure I'm here.
We got a
I
long
know you gotta be
campaign.
here next
And
time.
we
Okay,
appreciate
yes.
you for joining us. And I know you've been ripping and running, but when's the last time you had fun? Like, when's the last time you went on a date?
Did
She
you
was
get
jumping
to
up and down last night.
Did you get to bowl?
Yeah, I
at Brooklyn
was.
Bowl?
Did you see? I was literally.
Like, you went to Essence. Did you do the electric slide? Like, when did you have fun? When's the last time you went on a date, and where did you go? I'm just curious.
Oh.
Why you think she got Can't Millie Rock or something? Why got to be the electric
She
slide?
didn't Millie Rock. She was Essence.
I'm so
Lord have
sad.
mercy.
today.
You ain't got
my
no fun.
goodness.
I have had no time off. Let me tell you how sad it has been. The last, I love to cook.
Right.
The last time I cooked was to prepare a roast chicken for a morning show that I wanted to see if I knew how
Lord
to
have
cook.
mercy.
That was that long ago.
That's weird.
And that was a couple weeks
So you got
ago.
hubby eating McDonald's.
Why the hell they
and
make you cook
women-
My
think
poor
they would make
husband.
Joe
Let me
Biden
just tell
cook
you,
a
my
roasted
poor
chicken?
husband.
I don't like that.
No, let me tell
You
you what
have
I
to be chicken.
so let me
That's
tell
weird.
That's kinda racist.
Let me tell you.
I don't like that.
No.
At least they didn't make you fry it.
It was my choice. It was my choice.
Oh,
I wanted to roast
Chick-fil-A
it.
and
But let me
McDonald's.
know what I've been doing is that whenever I'm home, which is so rare these days, I will cook like a big pot of something and then freeze it in these like 2 and 3 cup containers and put it in the freezer and mark it. So that when my husband's there by himself, he can have some home cooked food.
Poor hubby. Poor hubby.
No, so how is? Well, she got to go. I'll go ask her how is it for him because me and him had a conversation last night.
Yeah.
And just as a man, you feel like you got to protect your wife. So when you see the Trump Juniors and everybody getting at you about certain things, like he really has to sit on his hands,
Take a
hold his
step
tongue
back.
on a lot of things. You know.
Yeah, he does. He's and he is very protective. I mean, to the point that he had to jump on stage one day.
And I'm sure your whole career has been like that from, everything that you've done up until now,
Well,
being Attorney General, being
it's-
attacked.
Right, and that's true.
in the
And
media.
you're exactly right. And then, but also to your point, being told it can't be done is not something that I just heard for the first time. I've been told that my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
Being told that people aren't ready for a woman, people aren't ready for a black woman. I've been told that my entire career.
People not ready for someone from Howard. Mhm.
Right, especially, just don't have me go to Hampton. But it's not new.
Right.
And here's the thing. And we won. And so the best way to keep progress going in our country and to keep breaking these barriers is we have to show people that it can be done.
It's to win.
And it will not be easy, and it will be very difficult, and we are going to have good days, we are going to have bad days. Breaking barriers is about breaking things.
Historic
And that's
number
painful.
of women in government now.
Yeah, right. That's right. In 2018, which is to that, and maybe that's a great place I think to end, which is about with optimism, because let's not overly rely on 2016 to predict what's going to happen in 2020 in terms of this election, because 2018, to your point, tells us there's going to be a different path. In 2018, we elected over 100 women to the United States Congress. Historic. People are woke, and they're ready.
We
Give them that
appreciate you
website
for joining
again
us. Yeah,
so
give
they can
them the
donate.
website.
KamalaHarris.org. Please go to KamalaHarris.org.
Well, Senator, thank you for joining us
I
again.
appreciate
Always a
you.
pleasure.
Senator
Thank you,
Kamala
Breakfast
Harris.
Club.
It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.